Good evening and welcome. Tonight we're going to be continuing our read through of the Kingfisher History Encyclopedia. If I recall, we left off at the start of Rome. Let's find it. That's right. Here we are. The founding of Rome. And I've got a pencil over here to help us read. Let me look this up a bit. There we go. The founding of Rome. According to tradition, the city of Rome was founded in 753 BCE by local tribespeople who had established their camps on Rome's 7 hills. Legends say that early Rome was ruled by local kings, of whom Romulus was the first. The citizens were Sabines Latins, who united to form one town, thinking of themselves as Romans. They were influenced by their neighbors to the north, the Etruscans, and traders from Greece and Carthage, who brought in new ideas about culture and society. The Etruscans, whose kingdom was called Etruria, lived in a group of city-states which emerged around 800 BCE. They were farmers, metalworkers, seafarers, and traders, and liked music, games, and gambling. They were greatly influenced by the Greeks, adopting the Greek alphabet, wearing hematon or robes, and believing in Greek gods. Many of their ways were passed to the Romans, who eventually took Greek-style culture to its ultimate expression. The Kings of Rome. The kings of Rome wore togas with purple borders. In processions, the kings were preceded by standard bearers who carried a fasces, or bundle of rods, and an axe blade, a symbol of power representing the king's right to rule over everyone else. Legend has it that 7 successive kings ruled Rome for 240 years. Kings did not have complete power. They had to contend with an assembly of nobles who grew more influential as time passed. Down carefully. An assembly had a say in electing the king and what he could do, especially in war. The kings formed armies to defend Rome. There were arguments between the kings and the patricians, or the leading families. The kings represented the old ways, and urban Rome was changing. The new elite of patricians eventually overthrew the monarchy in 509 BCE and declared Rome a republic. It was the first republic in the history of the world. Romans did not plan to become a great imperial power. At first they wanted only to protect themselves and fight off their interfering neighbors. However, within 500 years, Rome was to become the center of the Western world, taking over from the Greeks. Moving on to Babylon revived, 626 to 539 BCE. Tribespeople from the west, called Chaldeans, migrated into Assyria and Babylonia from about 1100 BCE. Several Chaldeans served as kings under their Assyrian overlords. In 626 BCE, a Chaldean king called Nabopolassar took power, declared Babylonia independent, and threw off the Assyrian yoke. Nabopolassar then crushed the Assyrians in 612 BCE. His son Nebuchadnezzar drove the Egyptians back into Egypt and took Syria. Nebuchadnezzar was one of the most famous kings of Babylonia. He came to power in about 605 BCE. His story is told in the Bible in the book of Daniel. He invaded many of the former Assyrian lands and the deserts west of Babylon. Among other conquests, Nebuchadnezzar captured Jerusalem and forced thousands of Jews to live in Babylon as prisoners because they had been rebellious. He made Babylon the master of all the lands within the Fertile Crescent. Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar devoted most of his time to making Babylon still more beautiful, a capital of the world. He had huge walls built around the city, and he named the main gate after the goddess Ishtar. He also built the Hanging Gardens, stepped gardens overlooking the city. He built a large bridge over the Euphrates River and an enormous ziggurat, the Temple of Marduk, or Bel, or the Tower of Babel. Nebuchadnezzar built himself a fine palace, and he also improved the other cities. He encouraged the worship of the old god Marduk, seeking to revive Babylon's and Sumer's former greatness. Nebuchadnezzar ruled for more than 40 years, but in his later years he suffered from spells of madness. Decline and fall. The Babylonian Empire survived for only 6 years after Nebuchadnezzar died. His son, Awil-Marduk, given the name of evil Merodach in the Bible, I assume, reigned for 3 years before being assassinated. 2 other kings, one of them a child, reigned for just 3 more years. Assyrian prince Nabu-Naid then seized power in Babylon and tried to persuade the people to worship his own god, Sin, rather than Marduk. He made Belshazzar co-ruler. Meanwhile in Persia, a new young king, Cyrus II, had risen to power after taking the throne in 557 BCE. He had ambitions to take over Mesopotamia and found a Persian Empire. In pursuit of this goal, he invaded Babylonia and captured the city of Babylon in 539 BCE. Nabu-Naid was deposed and his son killed by the invading forces. Cyrus the Great, as he became known, freed the rebellious Jews who had been made captive in 586 BCE by the young Nebuchadnezzar. Babylonia was then ruled by the Persians for more than 2 relatively peaceful and stable centuries, until the time of another youthful king, Alexander the Great, who defeated the Persians and captured Babylon in 331 BCE, making it his capital. I think you'd be able to see that. I wasn't sure if that was in the shot or not. Anyway, the Greek Dark Age, 1100 to 600 BCE. When many of the Mycenaeans fled around 1200 BCE, Greece entered its Dark Age. This left a gap, which was filled by a new people, the Dorians. There is no written history of this period, which lasted some 500 years. The Dorians did not have the culture or the skills of the Mycenaeans. They spoke a different kind of Greek, and they did not yet write things down. Historic sagas. The Dorians preserved memories of the Mycenaean age by telling long poetic sagas. When they adopted writing from the Phoenicians, they wrote down these poems. 2 poems, Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, tell of the siege of Troy and one of its heroes, Odysseus. Objects found in Mycenaean graves match Homer's descriptions. City life. During the Dark Age, people abandoned town life, to live in tribes ruled by warlords. By 600 BCE, city life had revived and overseas colonization began. Power was held by tyrants or mayors, or oligarchies, or groups of leaders. Trade, population, and prosperity grew. After times of unrest around 500 BCE, some cities such as Athens appointed reformers to reorganize government, law, and trade. This was the beginning of classical Greece. Let's move on to the Chao Dynasty, 1112 to 221 BCE. The Chao Dynasty ruled China for over 800 years. They brought China a golden age, the growth of towns, trade, and early Chinese imperial culture. The Chao began as a group of wandering herders who had settled in the fertile Wei Valley in western China. They ousted the last king of the Shang dynasty, who was cruel and a drunkard. The Chao domain was not a single kingdom, but a collection of large estates, whose rulers owed loyalty to the king. Society was divided into rich nobles, common people, and slaves. A merchant class also developed. The Chao introduced ironworking to China, using the metal for weapons, domestic items, and farm tools such as plows. Iron made farming easier and gave Chao soldiers an advantage in war. Royal decline. After a few centuries, royal authority declined, and China entered an unstable springs and autumns period. The king held official power, though he was dictated to by the strongest lord of the time. Later, the period of warring states followed, which was dominated by warlords. During this troubled period, early classical Chinese thought took shape. This was the time of Confucius and Lao Tzu, philosophers and sages. At this time, the idea of a centralized Chinese imperial state came into being. Next is the Persian Empire, 559 to 331 BCE. Iran used to be known as Persia. Its people comprised 2 groups, the Medes and the Persians, who migrated to Persia from Central Asia about 2,800 years ago. At first, the Medes were very powerful. Then, nearly 2,550 years ago, Cyrus, the ruler of the Persians, rebelled against the Medes and seized control. Cyrus the Great made Persia the center of a mighty new empire. His capital was at Ecbatana on the Silk Road, now buried under the modern city of Hamadan. Conquering kings. Cyrus commanded a mighty army of cavalry and skilled archers. Taking advantage of the weaknesses of his neighbors, he conquered an empire extending from the Mediterranean to Afghanistan. His son Cambyses invaded Egypt. The Persians gained the support of their subjects by ruling fairly. Darius I eventually extended the empire into India and Greece. He also reorganized it, appointing satraps or governors to each province. They paid him taxes in cereals, silver, and agricultural produce. Uniting the ancient world. Darius built roads and market towns to reach all parts of his huge empire and encouraged trade by introducing a standard coinage. The Persians controlled the western end of the Silk Road from China and all trade from India to the Mediterranean. This wealthy, cosmopolitan empire linked most of the ancient civilizations of the time. However, it relied on the strength of its rulers. Eventually, the Greeks brought the empire down and took it over. Religious teaching. In religion, the Persians followed the teachings of a Persian prophet named Zarathustra, or in Greek, Zoroaster. Zoroaster had adopted the ancient Persian tribal religion, which the Persians had brought with them from Central Asia. They worshipped one god, Ahura Mazda, who they believed was locked in divine battle with Ahriman, representing sleep, and Satan, representing evil. Although Zoroastrianism did not become a world religion, it later influenced many other faiths, including Christianity. This influence can be clearly seen in the biblical book of Revelations. Let's see, the arts and architecture, and I think, pretty sure, yeah, that's going to be like the end of the first chapter. So let's read these last bits, and we'll call it a night. We'll venture on to the whole next big chapter on another day. Let's read about the arts from 25,000 to 500 BCE. Since the earliest days, humans have decorated objects, made adornments, and represented ideas in artistic ways. This is a crucial part of the development of culture. The early people who lived in Europe some 25,000 years ago made little clay models of goddesses and animals. These are thought to be totems or religious objects to help encourage the fertility of the land or to communicate with the spirits of the animals. Some ancient peoples painted vivid pictures deep inside caves showing animals, tribal shamans, and hunting scenes. Artistic skills. Once people started leading more settled lives, they began to make pottery and other decorated items. In China, the people of Yangshao painted pots with geometrical patterns on them. As copper and bronze replaced stone for weapons and tools, metal workers became important, and the tools and objects they made were richly decorated. They did this not just to make them beautiful. By carving gods or sacred symbols on their tools or weapons, they believed that they would make them more effective. As towns and cities grew and states became wealthier, impressive temples, palaces, and other monumental buildings were decorated with carvings and paintings showing what life was like. From the frescoes of Mycenae to the Egyptian tomb paintings, and from Olmec carvings to Chinese painted pottery, the art of these ancient people has given us an insight into their way of life. Writing. Writing was originally a work of art, made up of pictures representing ideas or objects. Around 100 BCE, the Phoenicians invented the world's first alphabet. It had 22 characters. All were consonants, none were vowel sounds. The pictograms of ancient China represented whole words. One pictogram might mean mountain or town. Modern Chinese characters still represent concepts like this instead of sounds. Let's read about architecture from 40,000 to 1500 BCE. The earliest humans lived in caves or any other natural shelter they could find. Eventually, people started making more comfortable homes and other buildings for themselves using wood, mud, and stone. The first buildings people made were tents of animal skins supported on wooden poles. In some places, they used mammoth bones to weight the structure down. Mud brick houses. Around 6000 BCE, people started to build homes using dried mud and wood. They covered the walls with fine plaster on which they painted decorations with pigments taken from plants. The floors were bare or covered with straw or animal hides. Furniture, such as tables and beds, was also made from mud bricks. Roofing material. To keep out the weather, early people made roofs of wooden poles covered with twigs and leaves, straw, or thick mats of soil known as sods. In hot climates, roofs were made flat to reflect the sun's rays, keeping the buildings cool. Houses in Jerusalem had flat roofs, each one with the parapet or low wall to stop visitors falling over the edge. In temperate climates, roofs were made sloping so that rainwater could run off quickly. Around 4000 BCE, the Sumerians of Mesopotamia built their homes entirely from marsh reeds. They used several layers of reeds to create large curved roofs, but these roofs did not survive very long. They needed to be replaced every few years. Building with stone. Around 3000 BCE, people in Europe, Egypt, South America, the Middle East, and China started to use stone as building material. At first, they used uncut stone. Then, as metal tools were developed, they cut and shaped the stone into large rectangular slabs. The blocks of stone were laid one on top of the other. Flat or sloping roofs spanned the walls. Not all these early buildings were built for people to live in. Some were made for religious purposes and others as tombs for the dead or shelters for farm animals. They include the pyramids and temples of Egypt and South America, the ziggurats of the Middle East, and monuments such as Stonehenge in Britain. Unlike these made from mud and wood, many stone buildings have survived to the present day. And lastly, we have science and technology. The early history of the world is often divided into periods named after the materials used for the technology of the time: stone, bronze, or iron. The three main divisions are Stone Age, Bronze Age, and Iron Age. These divisions cover different periods of time in different parts of the world, and they represent periods of development rather than specific historic dates. For example, in Çatalhöyük in Turkey, the use of copper started around 6200 BCE, but for Aboriginal Australians, the Stone Age continued almost until the present day. The spread of technologies. In ancient China, the Bronze Age started around 2700 BCE and it lasted for over 2,000 years. In other places, technologies were introduced through foreign contact. In Africa, ironworking started around 800 BCE when it was imported from Egypt, leading them out of the Stone Age. One of the most significant inventions was the wheel, first used by Sumerians more than 5,000 years ago. It needed flat surfaces such as roads to run on. Boats were important, powered by paddles or poles, then oars and sails. These were the best means of travel, and many early civilizations depended on rivers and boats for transportation. Making life easier. Many farming, domestic, and military implements were needed. They ranged from needles and eating utensils, pots and furniture, spades and saws, to swords and battering rams, all invented to meet different needs over the centuries. Each of them made life easier and better. These objects allowed urban civilizations to come into being and flourish. From abacus to computer. Is it abacus or abacus? I don't remember anyway. All of the technologies in use today have their roots in this prehistoric period. In modern times we use computers, but in counting systems such as the abacus were invented thousands of years ago. I think it's abacus, I'm not positive. See, when it happened in 9000 BCE, arrowheads were first made in North America. 8000 BCE was the first farming in Mesopotamia. 3000 BCE, this is all circa by the way, 3000 BCE, the wheel is used in chariots in Mesopotamia. 2700 BCE, Chinese start making bronze and weaving silk. 2500 BCE, bricks are used, first used for building in the Indus Valley. 1500 BCE, iron is smelted by the Hittites in the Middle East. And that's where we're going to end tonight. Oof, little pencil sound. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video relaxing and educational. Sorry, it's a short one. I'm not feeling 100% tonight. I've been dealing with migraines and my Tourette's is kind of acting up. I don't think you'll be able to tell in this video, but I've been like